The 2013 elections is shaping up to be a really exciting one. Tonight, we will give you a rundown of the events and issues that you need to know. Join us as we count down to the upcoming midterm polls. Good evening, I'm Mai Rodriguez, and this is Elections 2013. We saw him on TV during the 2010 elections, a former Cablelink commissioner and the youngest commissioner given the task of overseeing the conduct of the very first automated elections in the country. We will be joined tonight by attorney Gregorio Larrazabal. He's going to be with us for the next 6 months. It's a pleasure having you with us,
The pleasure is mine. Thank you very much for having me here.
Philippine politics is in constant evolution from the basic political culture under the colonization of Spain and the United States. Local and national politics have come a long way, but one reality has not changed. Power and influence remain in the hands of a few. Let's watch a special report on political dynasties in the Philippines by Camille Elemia.
Political dynasties are not exclusive to Philippine politics. The US has the Kennedy and Bush families, India has the Gandhis, Indonesia has the Suharto family, Malaysia has the Razak, while Thailand has the Shinawat family. Political analyst Mon Casiple says martial law gave birth to a number of political dynasties, bred by the Marcos dynasty itself. Nearly 3 decades after martial law, many of these political families are still in power. The 1987 Philippine Constitution, born after the EDSA revolt, strived to change that. Article 2, Section 26 states, the state shall guarantee equal access to opportunities for public service and prohibit political dynasties as may be defined by law. The problem is, to this day, the law has not defined political dynasties, and that meant the preservation of the status quo. According to a study of the Asian Institute of Management Policy Center, at least 115 members, or 68% of the members of the 15th Congress elected in 2010, have relatives who were members of the 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th Congresses, or local officials who were elected in 2001, 2004, and 2007. The AIMPC study shows that based on their statements of assets, liabilities, and net worth, legislators belonging to political dynasties appear to be richer. The same study shows that political dynasties are also prominent in the country's political parties. They make up 76% of the Lakas Kampi Party, 56% of the Liberal Party, 74% of the Nationalist People's Coalition, and 81% of the Nacionalista Party. Casiple says a family becomes a political dynasty primarily due to the good record of the first generation. But he says this is not usually continued with the second, third, and future generations. In the 2010 national elections, the top 3 presidential candidates all come from political families. President Benigno Aquino got 15,208,678 votes, Joseph Estrada got 9,487,837 votes, and Manny Villar got 5,573,835 votes. And 8 of the 12 winning senatorial candidates all come from political families: Revilla, Estrada, Enrile, Cayetano, Marcos, Recto, Osmeña, and Gingona.
Interesting point you raised earlier as we were talking, Goyo, that this anti-political dynasty bill will for sure be challenged in the Supreme Court.
Yes, because the anti-dynasty bill pending in Congress now, the basis of which is the Constitution, Section 26, Article 2, which states that the state shall guarantee equal access to opportunities for public service and prohibit political dynasties as may be provided by law. You have to relate this with Section 1 of Article 3, which provides that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall any person be denied equal protection with laws. Now, Article 6 provides for specific qualifications of senator and members of the House of Representatives. Now, if a person running for Congress in 2019 or 22 suddenly finds himself married to an incumbent official, and because of that law is prohibited from running, that person may claim violation of his right to equal protection of the laws because there has to be a substantial distinction between that person and every other registered voter. So I'm sure it will be challenged before the Supreme Court, but what's important is the Supreme Court resolves this issue, and when it resolves the issue, it clarifies all the other matters that may be raised to provide clarification for guidance for future candidates.
Yeah, especially on the definition of political dynasty.
Because the definition now specifies the limit of 2 degrees of consanguinity or affinity. Now, why make it 2 degrees? Why not 3? Why not 4? So there has to be a clear-cut explanation on what are the specific limitations or prohibitions and why these prohibitions are set.
All right. To help us understand the nature of political dynasties, we are joined here in the studio by one of the most trusted political analysts in the country, Professor Popoy de Vera. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Professor.
Good evening.
All right, so let's start our discussion. Professor de Vera, is there really no end to dynasties here in the Philippines?
Well, political dynasties have been part of our political system since time immemorial. It only becomes fashionable to talk about it as election time nears because everybody gets agitated with the same names.
Since the late 80s, after the ratification of the 1987 Constitution, several lawmakers have filed bills for the passage of an anti-dynasty law, but until now, no bill has yet become a law. What do you say of this?
Because the people who are supposed to legislate an anti-dynasty law are members of political dynasties. You do not expect Congress to pass it because there's no incentive for them to prioritize it. Because upwards of about 70% of members of the House are members of political dynasties.
Yeah, so would you say the prospect of an anti-dynasty law here in the country is dim?
Very dim. It is good to want to have it, but we should not put all our expectations on an anti-dynasty law. There are other laws that we need to enact which will help democratize the playing field for elections. So I think we have to look into the other determinants on why our electoral system is this way and cure it while waiting for an anti-dynasty law.
So what you're saying is we don't look at just the trees, but the forest. We look at the holistic approach to solving the problem.
Political dynasties are products of a flawed political system that was put in by the Americans. Remember, the first time Filipinos were allowed to vote for their own public officials in 1916 through the Jones Law, access to political power, access to the right to vote was restricted by a gender dimension, meaning only males could vote, only those with property could vote, and only those who could read and write in Spanish or English could vote. So from the start, the choices were already restricted from day one. And those same families who had access to political power in 1916 are the same families that are lording it over now.
So how do you propose we change the political setup here in the Philippines with political parties made up of traditional politicians mostly?
Well, first is we need to make sure elections are cheaper. So campaign finance laws have to be enacted or implemented because that is what makes elections difficult. It's just too expensive. Second, we have to enforce existing laws. For example, election expenses, political ads. Comelec has to really control that. And then we need to make sure that political parties actually become real political parties, not masquerading as parties of political families.
It's basically a party of convenience. If, like, for example, I don't agree with you, or if I don't get the nomination, I set up another political party.
Yeah,
So that's
the only function of political party to many politicians is they have access to election results.
But what happens once and if a anti-political dynasty law is passed and somebody questions it in the Supreme Court? What do you see what will happen?
It's going to be very difficult because one, there is no jurisprudence on political dynasties. Our legal system relies a lot on the United States. There's no anti-dynasty law in the United States. Most of our neighbors in Asia are parliaments, and political dynasties take on a different dimension in a parliamentary system. So it's going to be very difficult for the Supreme Court to decide who they will side with.
What about choices, voter choices? You know, how does political dynasties limit or affect voter choice?
Well, political dynasties proliferate in situations where political families control both the political and economic lifeblood of a local community. Meaning those in power control the economic activities of an area, and also those who have control over economic power make sure they remain in office. So that is where dynasties come in. You are able to keep on winning simply because you control whatever happens at the local level.
But do you think they'll still vote for the most prominent name, or the name that stands out because they're powerful?
Well, dynasties have a different dimension at the local level and at the national. Because in the national level, the phenomenon of political dynasties now is really because of the media. You know, for you to win now, the media dictates how people look at candidates. And so somebody sitting in a senator has the advantage not only of name recall, but also has the resources to pay for political ads, and therefore brings along his daughter, his son, his wife into the Senate. So there are two things. You cannot cure dynasties at the national level with the same cure as you have at the local level, because these are two different issues.
So what do you say about the concept of political dynasties is people look at political dynasties only at the national level, but as you mentioned, there are political dynasties on the local level. How would you address this? Should we have two separate bills or just one bill which addresses both problems?
I think to have a real impact, it is the dynasties at the local level which should be controlled, because the effects of perpetual control over the politics in the local area, you know, is more dangerous than at the national level. So I think the key is to address it at the local first and control campaign finance at the national. I think if you're able to control the amount of political ads that are done by candidates, I think it would level a lot of the things at the senatorial and presidential level.
Right, very interesting discussion. Thank you, sir. We would like to thank our guest, Professor Popoy De Vera, for joining us tonight. Up next, we will be talking to ACT Teachers Party List Congressman Antonio Tino, who authored the Anti-Political Dynasty Act of 2010. We will be right back. This is Elections 2013.
In 2004, then-Senator Alfredo Lim filed Senate Bill 1317, an anti-dynasty bill, followed by Senator Panfilo Lacson in 2007 and Senator Miriam Santiago in 2011. But 25 years after the ratification of the 1987 Constitution, an anti-dynasty bill has yet to be passed. In a Congress populated by politicians who come from political families, passing an anti-dynasty bill is next to impossible.
In the House of Representatives, it has always been archives. But the reality in the House of Representatives is you have at least 40% who are direct members of dynasty. That hasn't changed much.
Casiple is optimistic there will be an end to political dynasties. He says a combination of the new generation of politicians and a more mature electorate may end it in the next 1 or 2 decades. With majority of members of Congress belonging to political families, the prospect for an anti-dynasty law remains dim. They say the best way to ensure equal access to opportunities for public service is strengthening political parties, the use of technology for fraud-free elections, and creating an informed electorate.
You're still tuned in to Elections 2013 here on the Solar News channel. There have been many attempts to create a law that will prohibit political dynasties in government, but none of those bills were really made into law or signed into law. Joining us tonight is Representative Antonio Tino of the ACT Teachers Party List Group, who also co-authored the Anti-Political Dynasty Bill of 2010. Good evening, Congressman Tino. So tell us about first the highlights of this bill. I know there were previous bills filed, but none of them made it
that's
far.
true. As early as 1987, soon after the ratification of our present Constitution, the elder Gingona, Senator Gingona then, filed the bill, and it was approved by the Senate, but supposedly it was the House that did not take action on a similar bill. So our bill, this is House Bill 3413.
Yes.
The main provision here is the one that prohibits relatives.
Or spouses.
Yes, so well, the relatives here are defined as up to second degree of consanguinity or affinity.
In
are-
simple terms, Congressman, ano pong ibig sabihin?
Well, yung asawa,
Okay.
anak,
Second cousin? Kasama po ba yun?
cousins, no?
Oo. But to
um,
the second degree, does that count in the second cousins? Or yun ba ibig sabihin?
No, pag second cousin, I don't think so. No,
okay.
hindi na po kasama yon. So, prohibits these relatives from running for political office in the same province. No?
What do you think are the chances of it pushing through this time around, sir?
Well, this bill was filed in late 2010. It's now 2012. It was the bill was referred to the House Committee on Suffrage and Electoral Reforms. And so far, not a single hearing has been called to discuss this bill.
But is there a reason that a meeting has not yet been called? Maybe the committee is busy with other bills? Or have you checked?
In fairness, the committee has been doing a lot of work, but scheduling committee hearings on bills is the call of the chairperson, and it seems this is not considered as
A
one of the
priority
priorities
measure.
compared to the others.
Realistically, is there still a chance that maybe the committee will issue a report before the 2013 elections?
Theoretically, it's still possible, although given the lackluster attendance in Congress, it will be very difficult.
How do you feel that there's no legislation on political dynasties that has yet been enacted by Congress?
Well, I think it's mandated by the Constitution,
It is.
and there is a growing clamor from the public for the enactment of a bill, an enabling law. More than 70% of the members of the House belong to so-called political dynasties. And the Senate as well is dominated, well, not dominated, but there are a lot of members of the Senate.
Yes.
And even the president, the current president, comes from one of the most powerful political dynasties in our history.
So do you think, sir, that this is a lost cause, given that, like you said, 70% of Congress belong to political dynasties? So many are saying that chances of this bill being passed into law are slim.
Well, I think the hope lies with the public. If there is really a strong clamor for it, then Congress will feel the pressure. So the bill, as written, kind of focuses on dynasties at the local government level.
What is your group doing, Congressman, that this time around to drum up support for this bill, or at least get a schedule for a public hearing?
Of course, for our part, education on this bill and on the issue of political dynasties and how political clans tend to monopolize political power. So that's been our main effort as far as our organization is concerned. But what I would like to mention, though, is that even though, for instance, the president has not expressed strong support for this bill, the executive can do a lot to address some of the issues that make political dynasties, the perpetuation of political dynasties possible. If we have economically independent voters, for instance, in the rural areas, If you have landowners, then they won't be dependent on their on political patronage, and they can vote more independently.
Congressman Tino, the basis for the bill is the constitutional provision that prohibits political dynasties. But what if a candidate who's related to a incumbent official says that, if you prohibit me from running, that will be denial of my equal protection under the Constitution, because I'm prohibited from running, which is a right granted to me by the Constitution. How would you answer them?
Well, in general, that would be true. That all individuals, they have political rights,
Have a
including
right,
the right
yeah.
to run in an election. But it's also in the Constitution as a constitutional provision. So, in other words, the framers of the Constitution thought that the political rights of members of political dynasties could be circumscribed for the sake of equal access to public service.
That's a good way of looking at the issues, and I think eventually the Supreme Court will have to rule on that one. But the fact that there is a bill proposing, or a bill for anti-political dynasties, that's a good step in the right direction for Philippine democracy.
We would like to thank Congressman Tino for joining us tonight. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you very much, Congressman.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, we will be having senatorial candidate Bam Aquino in the program. So stay with us. This is Elections 2013.
In Philippine politics, the Estradas are perhaps one of the more popular political families. We all know how this popular action star became president. His roles as the defender of the poor and downtrodden nailed him the mayoralty of San Juan in 1967. He was re-elected mayor until 1986, when he was asked to step down after the EDSA revolution. A year later, he was elected senator. In 1992, he was elected as vice president. In 1998, Estrada won the presidency with almost 11 million votes, one of the biggest ever registered in Philippine electoral history. But people close to the president will attest that however strong they appear, the Estrada dynasty dealt a major blow when their enemies took the presidency away. Corruption was also one of the biggest allegations against the Estrada presidency. On the basis of these allegations, Estrada was impeached. Estrada's enemies still took to the streets. EDSA Dos happened. The Estradas left Malacanang. Three months after, he was arrested for plunder. Luisa Pimentel Ejercito, or Loy, is Erap's wife. A doctor by profession, she ran for the Senate when her husband was incarcerated by former President Arroyo. She stayed as senator for 6 years. Estrada has 3 children with Loy, Jinggoy, Jackie, and Jude Ejercito. Jinggoy was 3-time mayor of San Juan, a post where his father began a career. In 2004, mother and son were elected to the Senate. Jinggoy sought a re-election in 2010 and is presently the Senate President pro tempore. Erap's other son, Baiguia Gomez, Joseph Victor or JV Ejercito, is currently the representative of the Lone District of San Juan. In 2013, JV will be running for the Senate. If he wins, he will share the Senate limelight with half-brother Jinggoy. JV has also decided to use Estrada instead of Ejercito. He admits he has a better chance of winning using the Estrada family name. Half-brothers Senator Jinggoy and Congressman JV are not in good terms, citing their strange family setup as reason. Recently, Jinggoy cried foul over JV's confirmation to media that they indeed have a feud. The two, however, say they will strive to work together if and when in the Senate for the sake of their father. San Juan, meantime, remains under Gomez, who will seek re-election as city mayor in 2013. Erap sees nothing wrong with his family playing an active role in politics.
Well, it's but natural for, like for example, There's so many whose parents are doctors. Their children become doctors also. And there are some lawyers, a famous lawyer, and their children become lawyers also. And because they are successful as doctor, they are successful as lawyer, their children follow their parents' footsteps. What's wrong if we became a successful politician? So my children followed my footsteps. There's nothing wrong with that.
You're still tuned in to Elections 2013 here on the Solar News Channel. Their involvement in Philippine politics date back to the Spanish era when General Serviliano Aquino, the patriarch, served as a delegate in the Malolos Congress, which drafted the country's first ever constitution sometime after we were liberated from Spain in 1898. Today, the Aquinos still hold powerful positions in the country's political scene, with its fourth-generation member, Benigno Noynoy Aquino III, serving as the 15th Philippine president. And now, another member of the Aquino clan is gunning for a seat in the Senate, presidential cousin Bam Aquino. Good evening, Bam. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening, Mike. Good evening, Attorney.
Good evening.
So, Bam, of course, the issue of political dynasties have been raised with you running in the Senate.
Ito na yung political reality natin right now, no? Mga iba't ibang mga kapamilya tumatakbo sa iba't ibang posisyon. So, it's very hard to generalize that all families in politics have done bad for the country. No? To be frank, even as I go around now with different people inviting me to speak and to introduce myself, you meet a lot of people in politics. Some of them, some families are definitely not good for our country, and some of them are doing well and have given a life of service. No?
How do you see yourself making a difference?
In the LP senatorial slate, I'm the youngest one to run. So at 35 years old, I think the perspective and the experiences of many young people, dala-dala natin yon. So even if I do have a same name of the president and of course other people who have come into politics, I think I have something different to offer. Especially with a different background and different experiences as well. And I hope that's something that our people will recognize and also look at. Maybe pag tapos na yung usapan tungkol sa mga last names namin, they can start looking at qualifications, things that we have done in the past and things that we still want to do. And hopefully, kami mga tumatakbo can be judged because of that. No?
My question is, there have been some who equate a credible elections with the eradication of political dynasties. What can you say about that?
It's very hard to generalize. No? I mean, I think our people have the capacity to really look into qualifications, into what people have done in the past, and not just lump everybody together. If you ask me, I think they might be barking at the wrong tree, no? Because for me, if you really want to level the playing field, it's about media more than it is about last names, no? Because people with the same last names have lost in the past. In fact, a lot of dynasties have been overthrown with newcomers coming in. But what I'm seeing for 2013 is that there's a lot of control in terms of media. And it's the people who can pay for the ads and pay for the commercials, which will really have an advantage, no?
My understanding is like when a lot of people hear the name Bam Aquino, they think you're a neophyte, and haven't been in public service. But my understanding is you've done a lot in just 35 years. No, you've served so many communities. You've won several awards.
Actually, I resisted going into politics for a long time. To be very honest, no. Coming from college, I worked in an NGO. Then I worked in government, actually, in the National Youth Commission as an appointed official. And then after that, we worked with poor communities, no? Working with microfinance organizations and cooperatives. At niresist ko talaga yung pagpasok sa politika for a very long time. And it was only probably the end of 2011, the start of this year, that I started to think about it quite seriously. And there were two people who talked to me about it. No? One was Senator Pangilinan, Kiko Pangilinan, who himself was 37 when he ran in 2001. And sabi niya, Bam, you should think about running for the Senate kasi kailangan ng kabataan dyan. No? They need to have a youthful perspective in the Senate. Another person who talked to me very seriously was Tony Miloto, the founder of Gawad Kalinga. And sabi niya, alam mo, Bam, kukonti lang yung may karanasan na nakatulong talaga sa mga komunidad na nakakaabot sa Senado. So he said, you should really think about it. And, I thought about it seriously. It's not an easy decision to make, no? I reflected on it and nakita ko naman na, I do want to serve. I do have something to offer. So around June of this year, I spoke to the president and I said, kung naghahanap yung partido ng youth candidate, someone who has worked in the youth sector and someone who has worked in communities, then I'd be available for the slot. No? And it took them a long process, about 3 months to decide who would be in the final slate. No? But a few days before the proclamation, Secretary Rojas called and said, if you still want it, you have the slot in the 12. No?
Ma'am, do you think your inclusion in the Liberal Party ticket will actually hurt the party with this issue on political dynasties coming up again?
I don't think so naman. No? If you look at the slate, many of us actually come from a lineage of people who have been into politics. No? I think what the party stands for right now are people who've said, yung mga reformang ginagawa ni Pinoy, kami yung magpapatuloy nito. No? Whatever last names we have. A lot of the people in my team, so to speak, no, do have relatives currently in the Senate and who have had relatives in the Senate. So I don't think my inclusion will necessarily aggravate that situation.
But you know, you're given an advantage here because people will say, given your Aquino name, you're a sure win, or you have a big chance to win in the elections. And then people will also argue that if you don't run, you're actually giving others a chance.
Well, dun with the first question, no, I don't really feel that way, no. Kasi right now in the latest survey, I'm number 15, no. The reality on the ground is absolutely the opposite. Hindi dahil Aquino ka, sigurado ka ng mananalo. And you can look at the surveys, no. So for me, it's really a battle, no. You really fight for every chance you get, and you try to convince more and more people. It's not like a sure thing. But it's up to us, really, for the newcomers to just work harder, no?
Can you say you're banking on the youth vote?
Yes, definitely, no? I mean, as the youngest one to run, and of course, majority of the voters are actually quite young, I'm hoping that they'll vote for somebody who still understands the current situation that they're in, no?
All right, we want our viewers to know about a candidate's stand on a particular issue. So what is your stand on the FOI bill and the RH bill?
Well, with regards to FOI, there are versions naman out there, no? And I think... well, if I'm not mistaken, Congressman Everdone said that there will be another round of talks na hahabulin nila yung before the end of Congress, no? And I think we just need to satisfy the drive for transparency and good governance, but also the aspect of national security.
Alright.
I think yun naman yung kailangan balansehin lang, no, na dalawang importanteng standards, no? With regard to the RH, the Congress, if I'm not mistaken right now, under Speaker Belmonte, is already working on a compromise bill. And I'm hoping that that bill will be more acceptable to both parties so they can pass it before the end of the Congress.
All right, so very simply, yes to FOI, yes to...
Yes to both, but there are versions right now being talked about. And in the case of RH kasi, naniniwala ko na yung parehong mga grupo, no, that both sides who are for and against it want the best for the country. It's just that maybe we need to be less hardline and really try to look at both sides and try to see if we can come up with a bill that is more palatable to both parties.
We would like to thank our guest tonight, Bam Aquino, for joining us here in the studio. And thank you also to you, Goyo Larrazabal. I hope you're on board for the whole 6 months prior to, or in the running to the 2013
It's a pleasure being here.
All right, I would like to thank you all for joining us tonight. Tune in again next week for another round of discussions regarding the upcoming midterm polls. I'm Mai Rodriguez, and this is Elections 2013. Good night.